Hello, welcome to my PowerPoint presentation on Violet Beauregarde, the real winner of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory in the 1964 movie. So these are the 5 points that I will be covering throughout this PowerPoint, and I will briefly list them out for you. The first one is that Violet is the most knowledgeable about candy. She has the most potential to be a businesswoman and manage a factory. She is sympathetic to others and could result in being a better boss than Willy Wonka. Her personality flaws fits the job and the company. And lastly, her mistake was reasonable and blinded. So these will be the three sources that I will be using throughout my entire PowerPoint. I will do my best to talk about whose source I am using as I am speaking, since all three of them have very similar views and they all talk about how Violet Beauregarde should have been um, the winner of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. So the first source that I will be using is a blog post by Avena. Um, it is titled Violet Beauregarde Should Have Won Wonka's Chocolate Factory, which can be found on Tumblr. Film Feature 43 is a film analyst. He likes to write reviews on films. And he has a YouTube video that is titled Violet Beauregarde Should Have Won Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. And it is a theory, which I will be talking about specific things he mentions in the video and how it applies to my PowerPoint. And the last source that I have is an online magazine by Andrew Scott, also known as I Heart Hollywood. And the title of his online article, I would say it's more of a web source, is titled Why Violet Beauregarde Should Have Won Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So, like I said, I will try to mention the person and where I got my facts from, as well as I will be providing the three sources at the end of this PowerPoint. So, my first point is Violet is knowledgeable on candy. So, on Avena's blog post, I was able to gather that Violet is committed to candy and she knows what she is talking about. When Wonka held the tiny yellow piece of gum in the movie, Violet was the only kid who knew exactly what it was. So, as we see that scene, it tells us that because Violet was the only one who knew what the little piece of gum, which was yellow, tiny square, since she knew exactly what that was, it tells us that Violet is knowledgeable on candy. Um, to add to that, she is also willing to switch to candy bars for the sake of the competition. So she's willing to get to know other candies, which allows her to know more about them. Um, and I think that's a valid point since Violet Beauregarde is a competitive gum chewer. She had been chewing a specific piece of gum for 3 months straight before she decided to switch to candy bars. And lastly, this proves that she is disciplined, goal oriented, competitive, and she's a risk taker. She's willing to step out of her element for the sake of a competition. And on top of having all of these skills, characteristics, it is very clear that this is what she would need to be a businesswoman. So, this proves that she's disciplined, oriented, competitive, determined, and is a risk taker, which is perfect for business. Um, and in Film Feature 43's YouTube video, Violet Beauregarde should have won Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. The reviewer has similar views to Avena's blog post because he mentions how Violet is competitive, she has longevity, she's determined, and she's also versatile. The only difference is that in Film Feature 43's YouTube video, he compares and contrasts Violet and Charlie. He says that Charlie gives up looking for a ticket after a couple of people have won, and that he's not confident, he's not competitive, and lacks tenacity. And so he's After some time, he's not as determined to find a golden ticket as much as probably the other kids were, which is the reason why they also won. So his idea is that Charlie is the exact opposite of Violet, which makes him less qualified to be a CEO of the chocolate factory. So this just gives a little bit more of information on why Violet should have been the winner and not Charlie. So it's really nice to hear Film Feature 43 talk about that, since it is important to as to why it doesn't make sense um, that Charlie won the factory. So my second point is that she has potential to be a businesswoman and can run a factory if she were to want to. Um, the one thing that we do know is that she's competitive, hard worker, risk taker. But we also find out in the movie that her father is a politician and a car salesman. So theoretically, if she wanted to, and if she won, she could have learned and taken up on knowledge and skills that would be needed to become a businesswoman for a factory. And essentially, this is a good point to talk about, since um, we notice that the other kids don't have that kind of privilege, and I will be talking a little bit more about that shortly with Film Feature 43's YouTube video. But on the other hand, in Avena's blog post, um, she states that unlike Violet, Veruca is also a girl that comes from a business family. Her dad is a nut salesman in the company. In the business world, I'm so sorry. In the business world, he owns a nut company or a business. But as we watch the movie, it's very clear that if you compare and contrast Violet, Veruca is not as qualified to be CEO of the chocolate factory, since she doesn't portray professionalism and she doesn't show that she likes business. She also lacks respect, so therefore, she's not qualified to be a CEO of the factory, even though her dad is a salesman. And this is a really good point for for Violet, since her dad is a businessman. She could have picked up on that and became a really awesome businesswoman. On top of the fact that she also portrays or shows that she is capable um, of doing that, since she does have businesswoman traits. So it's really obvious that out of all of the kids that were present there, Violet Beauregard would have had the most business like characteristics and persona. And in Film Feature 43's YouTube video, in a similar way to Avena's blog post, Film Feature 43 mentions that Violet's dad is a business and a salesman. He also mentions that Veruca and her father have a healthy, that Violet and her father have a healthy daughter-father relationship. So on top of him being a businessman, um, they also have a really good, healthy relationship, and you see that throughout the video. So she could have learned from her father to become a businesswoman for a chocolate factory, since they have a good relationship. It would have been easier for Violet to get a hold of that business aspect. Now, Violet is privileged because the other five contestants don't have role models that know about business. So that already says that they have a less advantage of being a true CEO of the chocolate factory. So my next point leads into the fact that Violet Beauregard is also sympathetic. She would be a very sympathetic boss. She does show to that she's sympathetic to others and could result in being a better boss than Willy Wonka. And in Avena's blog post, she talks about how Willy Wonka tests a three-course meal gum on Oompa Loompas, who are, for the record, his employees. So, on the other hand, Violet, who is a risk taker, would be willing to take the risk of testing new candy instead of Oompa Loompas. Um, I believe this theory simply because when we watch the movie, she steps up and takes the three-course meal gum and she eats it without even thinking about what the consequences were. And I think this is also an important thing to know is that she didn't really know what was going to happen from taking that piece of gum. So I think that's a very risk taker thing to do. And so, therefore, we can assume that she would be willing to put herself on the front line for her workers versus Willy Wonka, who actually tests on his workers. Um, it's a really good theory. I think it's important to know that Willy Wonka does test on his workers, who are the Oompa Loompas, and it's kind of a red flag on our side as viewers. So, additionally, Avena mentions that when Veruca Salt talked about buying an Oompa Loompa in the movie, like if they were pets, Violet makes sure to scold her and tell her to be quiet. So essentially, this just adds on to the fact that she can demonstrate that she would be an honest, caring, sympathetic boss. Um, and like Avena's blog post, Film 43's YouTube video, in a similar way, Film Feature 43 also explains the fact that Violet scolds Veruca for wanting to buy an Oompa Loompa. So this shows that she would stand up for her workers. We want somebody who can stand up for the workers, who loves their workers, who's caring, who's sympathetic, and I think that's important to note is that Veruca is a sympathetic boss. She would kill it. She would definitely be appropriate to be the next CEO of the chocolate factory as well as the new employer of the Oompa Loompas. My next point is Veruca's personality flaw fits the job and the company. Now, this will take a little bit of explaining to do because I know that might be a little bit tricky to understand. But first off, within Avena's blog post, she points out that when the kids get disqualified, the Oompa Loompas sing songs about morals. Um, and when Violet Beauregard ate the 3-course meal gum, she turned into a blueberry, and the Oompa Loompas started to sing about her chewing addiction. In the song, we hear gum chewing's fine when it's once in a while. It stops you from smoking and it brightens your smile. But it's repulsive, revolting, and wrong. Chewing and chewing all day long, the way a cow does. Now, this means that it's okay to chew gum, but chewing gum all the time is probably like socially unacceptable and impolite. Um, Although that is the case, compared to the flaws of other kids, it's not a terrible personality flaw. Simply because we know that if Violet wanted to quit, she'd be able to. Um, I mean, it's pretty clear that if she's willing to stop her habit for a competition, she can quit for good. Therefore, since she's obsessed with candy, her candy obsession fits the job. In other words, Willy Wonka is searching for someone that is the best of fit for the future of the chocolate factory. So Violet being obsessed with candy allows her to be the perfect CEO for the factory. And if we also want to talk about her personality flaw, it's not as red flag as the other 5 kids who were willing to contaminate the ceiling by taking fizzy drinks or contaminating the chocolate river or simply acting out in the workplace of the factory and getting tossed out as a quote unquote bad egg. And then Mike TV gets shrunk, he gets shrunken, and then he gets teleported through the TV, and he just causes a lot of catastrophe as well as Veruca. So, if we compare all of the situations and what happened and why each kid got disqualified, Veruca's is the least or not is not as worse as the bunch, and it's very clear when we see the movie. So, Willy Wonka wouldn't have gone wrong with choosing Violet as the winner of the Chocolate Factory. Now, in Film Feature 43's YouTube video, like Avena's blog post, he talks about how Violet's personality with Candy and how she's able to step out of her element for the sake of the competition proves that she's determined enough to grow, compete in a business, and make herself into the perfect CEO of the Chocolate Factory. So, leading into my next point, her mistake was reasonable and blinded. And for this last point, I just want to talk about the fact that in Avena's blog post, Violet was she talks about how Violet was purposely fooled into being disobedient, which led her to lose the competition. I mean, Willy Wonka didn't explain to her the consequences of chewing a three-course meal gum. I mean, he started out by telling them or asking them a question by saying, "Does anybody know what this tiny piece of yellow square is?" And Violet right away knew what it was, and he shot her down, for the record, after her answer was correct. He shot her down by saying, "Wrong, it's the most amazing, fabulous, sensational gum in the whole world." And not only was her answer correct after he asked what this was, but he also made it seem that um, like she needed to eat the gum. In that moment, Willy Wonka misled her and belittled her by saying that she was wrong in the first place, and and then he followed that up by saying, "Wrong, it's the most amazing gum." And so this led Violet to believe, like, this is my moment, gum is my element, I should eat it, you know? So she reached out, took the gum, and she ate it. Now, I will say that Willy Wonka did tell her, "Oh, I wouldn't do that. I really wouldn't." But he never explained to her the consequences like he did to the other kids. He told Veruca, "Do not stand on top of that scale. It reads bad eggs. It will toss you out." And she is clearly a bad egg, so she got tossed out. Mike was told not to mess around in the shrinking lab in the teleporting room, and he essentially messed with the teleporting stuff, and he got shrunk, and he was transported into a TV, and they didn't know how to get him out. And then Charlie was told about the fizzy drink and how the Oompa Loompas float up into the air. And not only did his grandpa influence him, that's a good example of not having the right influences and role model for a business, but they ended up drinking the floating drink anyways, and they started floating. And then lastly, Augustus was told not to put his hands into the river because he would contaminate the chocolate river, and he did it anyways. So, in this case, Violet should have been told about the consequences. And I guarantee that she wouldn't have proceeded with her decision. Essentially, this is a problem because I believe that Violet did the least amount of damage, and I think she was also misled, and it's unfair. But moving into Film Feature 43's YouTube video, in comparison to the blog post, Film Feature 43 talks about how Wonka made it clear that the river can be contaminated. The scale disposes of bad eggs. The teleporting device shrinks and teleports objects, and that the fizzy drink makes individuals float. But the difference between them and Violet is that they all choose to still do it even after they were told about the consequences. In Violet's case, she wasn't told about the consequences, so she didn't think that chewing a three-course meal gum would result in becoming or turning into a giant blueberry. So essentially, this makes her disqualification unfair. It's unfair. Unfortunately, to me, it's unfair. And now, following into my third source, which is I Heart Hollywood, an online magazine by Andrew Scott, he mentions that in that it's unfair that she ate candy and received consequences for it. I mean, isn't this a candy factory, a place where you can eat candy? Question mark. I mean, honestly, this is a candy factory. Kids expect to go to the candy factory to eat candy. So it's ludicrous that Violet gets in trouble for eating candy. It's misleading. It doesn't make sense. It's all in all just not fair. It's not fair that Violet was set up to thinking it was okay to eat candy and resulted in what it resulted to. Now, in conclusion, using all of the information that I've gathered from my three sources, um, I solely believe that Violet Beauregarde should have been the winner of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. Now, not only is Violet the best fit for the future of a the future CEO of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, but let's talk about her characteristics and skills as a person. She's determined, she's versatile, she's competitive, she's goal oriented, she's professional, and she's a risk taker. Please tell me how those aren't valid qualifications to lead the chocolate factory into the future. It is perfect. She has everything it takes to be the CEO of the chocolate factory. All in all, Violet demonstrates all the appropriate qualifications to be the future CEO of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, and she should have been the winner. Here, as I promised, are my three sources at the end of this presentation. And I just want to thank you guys for sitting here and listening to me analyze and talk about the reasons why Violet Beauregarde was the true winner of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. If you like this video, please let me know, and I would love to create more content. Thank you for your time.